My name is Pete, and at 32 years old, I thought I had my life and finances in perfect order until that Tuesday night. I was just checking my credit card statement, something I do religiously, when I saw it. $23,000 charged to a travel agency. My father had mentioned they were planning a small family trip. Said they were keeping it tight this year. But apparently my card was funding a luxury vacation for 14 people that I wasn't even invited to. If you're watching this and have ever been taken advantage of by family, hit that subscribe button while I tell you how I handled this betrayal. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and if you've ever had to deal with financially manipulative relatives. I grew up in a household where money was always an issue. My dad, Richard, worked as a salesman, and the commissions were unpredictable. Some months we lived comfortably, others we struggled to keep the lights on. When I was 12, everything changed. My father remarried a woman named Tanya, who had very different ideas about how money should be spent. Suddenly, the financial instability had a new cause. Where we once pinched pennies because we had to, now money disappeared into Tanya's expensive tastes even when we couldn't afford it. Tanya brought no children into the marriage initially, but within 3 years, they had 2 kids together, Mason and Lacey. From the beginning, it was clear these kids would have a different childhood than I had. While I wore second-hand clothes and rarely got new toys, Mason and Lacey never seemed to want for anything. When I needed money for a school field trip, it was always a struggle. When they wanted the latest video game console or designer clothes, the money magically appeared. I learned early that if I wanted anything in life, I would have to earn it myself. By 15, I was working after school at a local grocery store, saving every penny I could. My grades never suffered, though. In fact, I poured myself into academics because I knew education was my ticket out. When senior year came around, my hard work paid off with a partial scholarship to State University. It wasn't enough to cover everything, so I worked 2 jobs through college, often sleeping only 4 hours a night. Those years were brutal, but they taught me the value of financial independence. I graduated with a degree in finance, minimal student loans compared to my peers, and a job offer from Anderson Financial Group. The starting salary wasn't impressive, but it was more money than I had ever seen, and I had earned it entirely on my own. My father and Tanya attended my graduation, but it felt more like an obligation than a celebration. They arrived late, left early, and spent most of the time talking about Lacey's upcoming dance recital. Mason was 13 by then, and already showing signs of the entitlement that came from never hearing the word no. As the years passed, I climbed the corporate ladder at Anderson. I lived frugally, paid off my student loans, started building a retirement fund, and eventually saved enough for a down payment on a small condo. Every financial decision I made was calculated, a reaction to the chaos I had grown up with. My relationship with my father and his family remained complicated. I was invited to major holidays and occasional family events, but always felt like an outsider. Conversations revolved around their lives, their problems, their achievements. I was the audience, never the participant. When I shared news about my career, it was met with passing interest at best, or at worst, comments like, "Well, not everyone can be lucky enough to make that kind of money." Despite this treatment, there were moments of weakness where I offered financial help. When Mason needed a laptop for high school, I bought him one. When my father's car broke down, I covered the repairs. These gestures were always accepted without much gratitude and followed by subtle hints about other needs. The laptop wasn't the right brand. The car still had other issues. Each time I helped, I promised myself it would be the last. But family ties are hard to sever completely. 3 weeks before the incident that changed everything, I had dinner with my father and Tanya to share some good news. After 7 years at Anderson, I had received a significant promotion to senior financial analyst. The position came with a substantial salary increase, a bonus structure, and new responsibilities. For once, I wanted to celebrate my achievement with family. The dinner went as expected. My news was acknowledged briefly before the conversation shifted to Lacey's college plans. and Mason's new girlfriend. Tanya mentioned in passing that they were thinking of taking a family trip to Florida in the summer. Nothing fancy, my father had said. We're keeping it tight this year. Just a little break to relax. I nodded and didn't offer to contribute. Years of therapy had helped me establish some boundaries, and I was trying to stick to them. What I had forgotten about, however, was the shared credit card account I had set up for my father 5 years earlier. It had been during a particularly rough patch when he was between jobs. I had added him as an authorized user on one of my credit cards, strictly for emergencies. The arrangement was supposed to be temporary, but after he found work again, I simply forgot to remove him. The card had a high limit due to my excellent credit score, and since no unexpected charges had appeared over the years, it had slipped from my mind completely. That forgotten card would soon remind me of an important lesson. When it comes to money and family, never leave open doors. The night it all unraveled started like any other. I had been working late at the office, finalizing projections for a new client. By the time I made it home to my condo, it was after 10, and I was exhausted. I kicked off my shoes, loosened my tie, and microwaved some leftover pasta. As I ate at my kitchen counter, I opened my laptop to check my email and go through my financial accounts. This nightly ritual was something I had done for years. Some people scroll through social media before bed. I review my transactions and update my budget spreadsheet. It's a habit born from years of financial insecurity. A way of maintaining control. I had just logged into my credit card account when I saw it. A series of pending charges from a company called Luxury Escapes Travel, totaling $23,000. My fork clattered against the plate as I stared at the screen in disbelief. This has to be fraud, I muttered to myself, already reaching for my phone to call the credit card company. As I waited on hold, I scrolled through the charges, trying to make sense of them. There were multiple transactions over the past 2 days, all from the same merchant. Had my card information been stolen? Had I been hacked? When the customer service representative finally answered, I explained the situation. I'm seeing charges from a travel agency that I didn't authorize, I said. I need to report them as fraudulent. I understand, Mr. Preston. Let me pull up those transactions for you, the representative said. It looks like there are several charges from Luxury Escapes Travel. The first one is for $14,000 on Monday, described as beachfront, villa, rental, Naples, Florida, 10 nights. My breath caught. Naples, Florida. Where my father had mentioned they were planning to go. Can you tell me what else was charged? I asked, my voice tightening. There's a $4,000 charge, labeled private catering services, a $2,500 charge for group excursions package, and another $2,500 for miscellaneous travel expenses, including airport transfers. The room seemed to spin as the realization hit me. These weren't fraudulent charges from a random thief. This was my father and Tanya, using my card to fund an extravagant family vacation. Sir? Are you still there? The representative asked. Yes, I managed to say. Can you tell me if there was any communication with the cardholder about these charges? Any verification? It appears the charges were made in person at a travel agency office using the physical card. Since it's an authorized user on your account, making purchases within the credit limit, no additional verification was required. An authorized user, my father. Using the emergency card, I had forgotten about to charge a luxury vacation. I thanked the representative and ended the call, then immediately began searching through my email. Nothing from any travel agency. I checked my spam folder, and there it was. An email from Luxury Escapes Travel, with the subject line, "Your luxury vacation confirmation." With shaking hands, I opened it. The email was addressed to me as the primary contact, but Tanya's email was copied. The detailed itinerary confirmed everything. A sprawling beachfront villa with 7 bedrooms in Naples, Florida. Reserved for 14 guests for 10 days. Private chef services for multiple dinners. Deep sea fishing excursions. Sunset cruises. Airport transfers in luxury SUVs. The guest list wasn't included, but the reservation specified accommodations for 14 people. My father, Tanya, Mason, and Lacey only accounted for 4. Who were the other 10 people? My head pounded as I tried to process what was happening. They had used my card to book an extravagant vacation for 14 people. And from the looks of it, I wasn't even invited. The betrayal cut deep, made worse by the calculated nature of it. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This took planning, coordination. I called my father. No answer. I texted him. Need to talk to you about some unusual charges on my card. Call me. ASAP. While waiting for a response that didn't come, I did something I rarely do. I checked social media. Though I barely use my accounts, I'm still connected to most of my family members. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Tanya had been posting excitedly about their upcoming family getaway for weeks. There were photos of new luggage, shopping trips for vacation clothes, and vague references to a special surprise for everyone. In one post from just 3 hours earlier, she had written, "Packing nearly done. Can't wait for our luxury Florida. Escape with the whole crew. 2 more days." The comments section revealed even more. Responses from people I barely knew or had never met, all expressing excitement about the trip. Lacey's boyfriend Drew and his parents, Tanya's sister Amanda, and her husband Brett, and their 2 kids. Tanya's parents, Gordon and Helen. All apparently joining this. All expenses paid vacation, courtesy of my credit card. In a daze, I scrolled through more posts and discovered a group chat had been created for the trip. Though I couldn't access it directly, Lacey had screenshot parts of it and shared them on her page. The participants were discussing excursion preferences, meal requests for the private chef, and who would be sharing which rooms in the villa. My name was noticeably absent from all discussions. With a surge of anger and hurt, I called my half-brother Mason. He picked up on the 3rd ring. "Pete, it's late. What's up?" He sounded surprised to hear from me. "Mason, I need to ask you something about this Florida trip everyone's going on," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh," there was a pause. "What about it? When were you all planning to leave?" "Day after tomorrow. Early morning flight." "Why? Did Dad invite you last minute or something?" The casual way he asked if I had been invited last minute to a trip I was apparently funding made my blood boil. No. Nobody invited me. I'm just trying to understand why my credit card was charged $23,000 for a vacation I knew nothing about. There was a long silence on the other end. "Your card?" I thought. Mason's voice trailed off. Then, in a quieter tone, "Oh shit. I thought you knew since you're paying for it. Dad said you offered. As like, a family gift because of your big promotion." The final piece clicked into place. Not only had they used my card without permission, but they had also told everyone that I had offered to pay for the entire extravagant vacation as a gift. The level of deception was staggering. "Mason, I never offered to pay for anything. I didn't even know about most of these plans until an hour ago when I saw the charges." "Shit, Pete. I don't know what to say. They've been planning this for months. Like, since before your promotion even. Dad and Tanya said they wanted to do something special for everyone, and then when you got promoted, they started saying you had offered to cover it as a celebration." Months of planning. Using my promotion as cover for theft. 14 people. $23,000. And I wasn't even invited to the party I was hosting. As I hung up with Mason, the full weight of the betrayal crashed down on me. This wasn't a misunderstanding or a one-time lapse in judgment. This was calculated, intentional deceit from the people who were supposed to care about me most. And they were scheduled to leave in less than 48 hours. Sleep evaded me that night as my mind raced through the implications of what I had discovered. By morning, my father still hadn't responded to my call or text. This silence spoke volumes. He knew exactly what he had done, and he was avoiding the confrontation, with red eyes and a heavy heart. I made a cup of coffee and opened my laptop again. I needed to understand the full extent of the betrayal. As a financial analyst, gathering all the facts before making a decision was second nature to me. I started by reviewing the email confirmation from the travel agency again, this time noting every detail. The vacation was set to begin in 2 days, with airport transfers picking everyone up at 5 in the morning. The villa reservation started that same day. The itinerary was packed with activities, all prepaid on my card. Next, I dug deeper into social media. On Tanya's page, I found older posts hinting at the trip planning, going back nearly 4 months. In one post from February, she had written, "Starting to plan our summer escape. So excited to give everyone the vacation of a lifetime." This predated my promotion by months, confirming what Mason had said. They hadn't decided to use my money after learning about my salary increase. They had planned to take advantage of me all along. I checked Lacey's Instagram next and found a post from just yesterday. "New bikinis for Florida. Thanks Mom and Dad for the shopping spree." Attached were photos of expensive designer swimwear, with tags still attached. More charges I'd likely find on my next statement. The more I searched, the more I discovered. Tanya's sister Amanda had posted about buying special sunscreen for the trip. Getting ready for our luxury getaway. So grateful to be included. Lacey's boyfriend Drew had shared a picture of new golf clubs with the caption, "Can't wait to try these out on the championship course next week." Best girlfriend's family ever. Everyone was spending money, buying new things for this trip, expecting a level of luxury that I was unknowingly funding. The entitlement was breathtaking, but the most painful discovery came from a post by my father 3 weeks ago, right after our dinner where I had shared news of my promotion. He had written, "Proud of my son's accomplishments in the financial world. Some people know how to give back to their family. Looking forward to our summer plans." The calculated public narrative he was creating made me feel physically ill. Not only was he stealing from me, but he was also painting himself as the proud father and me as the generous son, building a fiction that would make it harder for me to object without looking like the villain. With shaking hands, I called my father again. This time, he answered. "Pete, I was just about to call you back," he said, his voice casual as if nothing was wrong. "Were you?" I kept my tone neutral. "I wanted to ask you about some charges on my credit card. About $23,000 to a travel agency." There was a pause then. "Oh, that. Yes. I was meaning to talk to you about that. It's for our family trip. I thought it would be easier to put it all on one card for the points. And since you mentioned having that good rewards program, the blatant lie stunned me. Dad, I never offered my card. I never discussed points. I didn't even know about this trip until I saw the charges. Well, not explicitly. But after you told us about your promotion, it seemed like you wanted to contribute. You know how tight things have been for us. And with Lacey starting college next year, stop." I cut him off. "Just stop. You used my card without permission to book a $23,000 vacation for 14 people. And you didn't even invite me." Another pause. "Of course you're invited. We just assumed you'd be too busy with your new position to take time off." Another lie. There was no mention of me in any of the planning documents or social media posts. No room assigned to me in the villa. No place set for me at the prepaid dinners. "Dad, this is theft. You understand that, right? You stole $23,000 from me." His tone changed instantly, indignation replacing the false casualness. "After all I've done for you, this is how you repay me? By accusing me of theft? You make so much money now. You won't even notice this amount. Your siblings have been looking forward to this trip for months. Are you really going to ruin it for them because you're being selfish?" The manipulation was so transparent it was almost laughable. Except, there was nothing funny about this situation. "Who were the 14 people going on this trip?" I asked, ignoring his attempt to guilt me. "Just family. Us, the kids, Tanya's sister and her family, her parents, Lacey's boyfriend and his parents. You know, family, most of whom I've never even met," I pointed out. And again, a trip I wasn't invited to. Until you got caught. "Pete, don't be dramatic. Of course, you were going to be included. We just hadn't gotten around to finalizing your part yet. Look, if it's really such a big deal, I can pay you back. Maybe not all at once, but over time." We both knew that was another lie. He had no intention of paying me back, and even if he did, It would be in small amounts that would eventually trickle to nothing. With constant reminders of his sacrifice. When were you planning to tell me about using my card? I asked. I thought you'd see the charges eventually, and we'd discuss it after the trip, when you could see how much it meant to everyone. You know, once you saw all the happy family photos, his strategy was clear. Create a fait accompli. Take the vacation, create memories, share photos, and make it impossible for me to object without being the villain who wanted to retroactively ruin everyone's good time. I see, was all I said. So we're good? You understand this is for the family? I didn't answer his question. Instead, I said, I have to go now, and ended the call. I sat in silence for several minutes, processing the conversation. Every word my father had said was calculated to manipulate, to shift blame, to make me feel guilty for objecting to theft. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't poor judgment. This was who he was, who he had always been. As the shock began to wear off, a strange calm settled over me. For years, I had allowed myself to be manipulated, always giving in to the emotional blackmail because they're family. But this time, they had gone too far. This time, I wouldn't roll over. This time, there would be consequences. I made myself another cup of coffee and began formulating a plan. With clarity of purpose, I set my emotions aside and approached the problem like I would at work. Methodically, strategically, and with attention to detail. First, I documented everything. I took screenshots of all the social media posts mentioning the trip. I saved the email confirmation from the travel agency. I recorded my phone conversation with my father, where he admitted to using my card without permission. Next, I called my friend Adrian, who worked as a lawyer specializing in financial crimes. Based on what you've told me, Adrian said, after I explained the situation, this is clear-cut credit card fraud. Even though your father is an authorized user, using the card for personal expenses of this magnitude, without your knowledge or consent, crosses the line into criminal territory. You have several options. Adrian outlined my choices. I could file a police report and press charges, which would likely result in criminal prosecution of my father. I could dispute the charges with the credit card company as fraudulent, which would trigger an investigation. Or, I could attempt to resolve it privately by demanding immediate repayment. Given the amount and the deliberate deception involved, I would recommend the second option, Adrian advised. Dispute the charges, but hold off on filing a police report for now. That leaves the door open for either resolution or escalation, depending on how they respond. I thanked Adrian for his advice and immediately called my credit card company. I spoke with a fraud specialist and explained the situation in detail. An authorized user had made large, unauthorized purchases without my knowledge or consent, and I wanted to dispute all charges from Luxury Escapes Travel. We'll need to close this card and issue you a new one, the specialist explained, and we'll begin an investigation into these charges. Since the user was authorized on the account, the investigation may take some time, but given the amount and nature of the purchases, we take this very seriously. I agreed to the process, provided all the documentation I had gathered, and requested that the card be canceled immediately. I also asked them to flag any attempts to use the card before the cancellation took effect. Next, I contacted the travel agency directly. I explained that the charges on my card were unauthorized and that I was disputing them with my credit card company. The agent expressed concern and confirmed they would cooperate with any investigation. When I asked about the status of the reservations, the agent informed me that everything was set and paid for, with electronic tickets and confirmations already sent to all participants. Is there any way to cancel these reservations? I asked. You could cancel, but at this point, the cancellation policy would mean you'd only receive a partial refund. About 30% of the total, the agent explained. All the excursions and services have been booked and staffed. I thanked the agent for the information, but didn't request cancellation yet. Instead, I called the airport security service. I explained that tickets purchased fraudulently in my name were going to be used in 2 days, and I wanted to alert them to the situation. We appreciate you bringing this to our attention, the security representative said. We'll make a note in the system regarding these reservations. If the travelers attempt to use these tickets, they'll be held for additional verification. With these measures in place, I turned my attention to protecting myself from further financial exploitation. I checked all my other accounts and changed passwords. I removed my father as an authorized user from every account. I placed fraud alerts on my credit reports to prevent new accounts from being opened in my name. Throughout the day, my phone buzzed with texts from my father, each more desperate than the last, as he likely discovered that the card was no longer working. Pete, the card is showing declined. Need to pay the balance for the excursions. Call me ASAP. There's an issue with the reservations. This isn't funny, Pete. The agency needs the card verification to finalize everything. I didn't respond to any of them. Part of me felt a twinge of guilt imagining the panic he must be feeling as his plans unraveled. But I reminded myself that this was the consequence of his own actions. For once, he would have to face the results of his choices without me rushing in to fix everything. By evening, the texts turned angry, then pleading. You're making a huge mistake. This affects everyone, not just me. Please, son. We can work this out. Don't ruin this for your siblings. I'm sorry if there was a misunderstanding. Let's talk about this. Still, I maintained my silence. I had said all I needed to say during our phone call. He knew exactly what he had done, and no amount of manipulation would change that fact. That night, I received a call from Tanya. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was a masterclass in victim blaming. Pete, I don't know what your father did to upset you, but punishing the entire family is incredibly immature. We've been planning this trip for months. Everyone has taken time off work. Your grandfather isn't getting any younger. And this might be his last chance for a family vacation. Think about someone besides yourself for once. My grandfather? My father's father had passed away when I was in college, and I barely knew Tanya's parents. The blatant, emotional manipulation only strengthened my resolve. As I prepared for bed that night, knowing the family was scheduled to depart early the next morning, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness for the family relationships that were likely permanently damaged. Anger at the years of manipulation I had endured. But mostly, I felt a growing sense of liberation. For the first time, I was standing firm in my boundaries, refusing to be exploited any longer. Regardless of the emotional cost, I slept better that night than I had in years. I woke up early the next morning, the day of the scheduled departure. Part of me wanted to turn off my phone and disconnect completely, but another part felt the need to witness the consequences unfold. I made coffee and settled in my living room, phone in hand, prepared for the storm. It began with a text from Tanya at 5:15 in the morning. The car service is here, but our flight information isn't pulling up on the app. Call. Immediately, 20 minutes later, a barrage of increasingly frantic messages followed. The airport kiosk won't print our boarding passes. What did you do? They're saying there's an issue with the payment method. Fix this now. Security is asking questions about the tickets. We're going to miss our flight. I didn't respond to any of them, but I could picture the scene unfolding at the airport. The confused family members, the embarrassed explanations, the dawning realization that their luxury vacation was crumbling before it even began. At 6:30, I received my first text from Lacey. Thanks for ruining everything. They're holding us at security, saying our tickets might be fraudulent. This is the worst day of my life. Mason texted shortly after. Dude, there's a huge scene here. Tanya's crying. Dad's yelling at the security people. Her parents are just sitting there looking shocked. What happened? I felt a brief impulse to explain everything to Mason, who was caught in the middle of a situation not of his making, but I decided against it. The truth would come out soon enough, and I didn't want my words twisted or used against me. Around 7, the messages took on a new tone, as the reality of the situation apparently began to sink in. Tanya's sister Amanda, whose number I barely recognized, sent, I don't know what's going on between you and your father, but this is incredibly embarrassing for everyone involved. We were told this trip was a gift from you. Lacey's boyfriend's mother, a woman I had never met, somehow got my number and texted. We took time off work and spent money on new vacation clothes based on your promise. My son is devastated. I hope you're happy. The entitlement was breathtaking. People I barely knew felt they had a right to a luxury vacation at my expense, and they were angry at me for not providing it. At 7:30, the text I had been half expecting arrived from my father. Our boarding passes are rejected. Security is questioning everyone. They think the tickets are fraudulent. You need to call the airline right now and explain this is a mistake. I waited 10 minutes before replying with just 7 words. Maybe try tightening the guest list next time. The response was immediate. What is that supposed to mean? This isn't funny, Pete. We're about to miss our flight. I didn't respond further. There was nothing more to say. My message had communicated exactly what he needed to know. I was aware of everything, and I wasn't going to be manipulated into fixing his mess. As the morning progressed, I received updates through texts from various family members. The entire group had been denied boarding. The security service had taken statements about the potentially fraudulent tickets. The travel agency had been contacted, but confirmed that the payment method had been flagged for fraud, and all reservations were now on hold. Tanya's parents had apparently left the airport in disgust. Lacey's boyfriend and his parents were arguing with my father in the terminal. Mason had separated himself from the group and was sitting alone, texting me periodic updates. Everyone's blaming Dad now. Tanya's sister just said they're going home and never speaking to us again. This is wild. Around noon, I received a particularly illuminating text from Mason. Dad finally admitted he used your card without asking. Said he was going to tell you after the trip and work out a payment plan. No one's buying it. I'm getting a ride home with Drew's parents. Sorry about all this. The truth was finally coming out, and the consequences were extending beyond just the missed vacation. The relationships my father and Tanya had with their extended family were clearly damaged, perhaps irreparably. Part of me felt sad about that, but another part recognized it as the natural result of their deception. By mid-afternoon, the messages slowed to a trickle. My father made one last attempt. We need to talk about this face to face. What you did today was inexcusable. The projection was almost comical. He had stolen $23,000 from me, lied to everyone about it. And yet somehow I was the one who had done something inexcusable. I turned off my phone, made myself lunch, and enjoyed the quiet of my apartment. For the first time in years, I felt truly in control of my relationship with my family. I had set a boundary and held firm. Despite the emotional manipulation and guilt trips, it wasn't easy, and it wasn't without pain, but it was necessary. That evening, I decided to take a personal day from work tomorrow. I sent a brief email to my supervisor, explaining I was dealing with a family emergency and would be unreachable. Then I turned my phone off completely, poured myself a glass of wine, and put on a movie I had been wanting to watch. As the film played, I realized I was smiling. Not because of the suffering I had caused, but because for the first time in my adult life, I had refused to be a victim. I had stood up for myself, regardless of the cost, and that feeling of self-respect was worth more than any family vacation. I returned to work the following day feeling strangely refreshed, despite the family chaos. There was something liberating about finally standing firm in my boundaries. As I settled at my desk and turned my phone back on, it immediately began buzzing with notifications. 15 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. 28 texts from various family members. 3 voicemails. I decided to listen to the voicemails first. The first was from my father, his voice tight with controlled anger. Pete, this has gone far enough. Call me back immediately so we can resolve this like adults. What you did was completely irresponsible and embarrassing for everyone. The second was from Tanya, her voice trembling with what sounded like rehearsed tears. I don't know why you're doing this to your family. Your father has always supported you. And this is how you repay him? By humiliating all of us at the airport? Call us back. The third voicemail made my blood run cold. It was from someone identifying himself as Gerald Hoffman, my father's lawyer. Mr. Preston. This is Gerald Hoffman, representing Richard Preston. I'm calling regarding the fraudulent claims you've made about credit card charges and the subsequent damages suffered by multiple parties. This is a serious legal matter that could result in significant liability on your part. Call me back at this number immediately to discuss resolution before we proceed with formal action. A lawyer. My father had actually gotten a lawyer to threaten me after he was the one who committed fraud. The audacity was breathtaking. As I sat processing this escalation, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from the same unknown number. My father's lawyer, calling for the 16th time. I declined the call and instead texted my friend Adrian. My father's lawyer is calling me with threats about the credit card situation. Can you recommend someone who specializes in this area? Adrian responded quickly. Come to my office at lunch. This is becoming more serious than I anticipated. Don't speak to his lawyer without representation. I focused on my work for the next few hours, ignoring the continuing calls and texts. At lunch, I met with Adrian, who listened carefully as I updated him on the situation. Your father is bluffing, Adrian said after I played him the lawyer's voicemail. He has no case. You disputed fraudulent charges on your own credit card. That's not only your right, it's your obligation. His lawyer is trying to intimidate you into dropping the dispute and paying for the vacation. So what should I do? I asked. First, we document everything. The unauthorized charges. Your father's admission on the phone that he used your card without permission. The social media posts showing they were planning this for months. Then, I'll make a call to Mr. Hoffman and explain exactly how weak their position is and how strong yours is. Adrian's confidence was reassuring. We spent the next hour organizing all the evidence I had collected, and he helped me draft a formal statement for the credit card company's fraud investigation. One more thing, Adrian said as our meeting concluded. I think you should file a police report. I know that sounds extreme, but credit card fraud is a serious crime, and having an official report will strengthen your position if they try to escalate this further. After leaving Adrian's office, I went to the local police station and filed a report about the unauthorized use of my credit card. The officer who took my statement was sympathetic, but straightforward. Family fraud cases are unfortunately common, she explained, and they're complicated because of the relationships involved. We'll investigate, but you should be prepared for difficult questions about why your father had access to your card in the first place. I nodded, understanding the complexity of the situation. He was an authorized user for emergencies years ago. I forgot to remove him. That's a common oversight, the officer said. But using an emergency card for a $23,000 vacation definitely crosses the line into fraud territory. As I left the police station, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Sadness that the situation had escalated to this point, but also a growing sense of empowerment. I was no longer passively accepting mistreatment. I was actively protecting myself. Back at work, I discovered an email from a name I didn't expect, Mason. The subject line read simply, I'm sorry, Pete. I had no idea what Dad and Tanya were doing with your card. They told everyone you had offered to pay for the trip as a family gift because of your promotion. No one questioned it because it seemed like something you might do, given how successful you are. I feel terrible for not checking with you directly. This whole thing is a mess now. Tanya's family isn't speaking to us. Lacey's boyfriend broke up with her. Dad and Tanya are fighting constantly. I just wanted you to know that I understand why you did what you did, and I don't blame you. Mason. Mason's email was a small ray of light in an otherwise dark situation. At least one family member understood and didn't villainize me for standing up for myself. I responded briefly. Thanks for understanding, Mason. None of this is your fault. Let's get together for lunch sometime soon. Just the two of us. As the day progressed, the calls from my father's lawyer continued, now interspersed with calls from my father himself. I blocked both numbers, following Adrian's advice not to engage without proper representation. That evening, I received an unexpected visit. The doorbell rang around 7, and when I checked through the peephole, I saw Tanya's parents, Gordon and Helen, standing in the hallway. I hesitated, then opened the door. Pete, Gordon said, his expression serious. May we come in for a moment? We'd like to talk. Cautiously, I invited them inside. We had only met a handful of times over the years, and I had no idea what to expect from this visit. We want to apologize, Helen said once we were seated in my living room. We had no idea the vacation was being charged to your card without your knowledge. Tanya told us you had generously offered to host the entire family as a celebration of your promotion. Gordon nodded. When everything fell apart at the airport, Richard initially claimed there was a mistake with the reservations. It was only after several hours of chaos that the truth started coming out. We're embarrassed to have been part of this situation. Their apology seemed genuine, and I felt some of my tension ease. Thank you for saying that. I never wanted to ruin anyone's vacation, but I couldn't let them steal from me and lie to everyone about it. We understand completely, Helen said. And we want you to know that we don't condone what they did. We raised Tanya better than that. We talked for about half an hour. They shared more details about what had happened at the airport and in the aftermath. Apparently, my father had initially tried to maintain the fiction that I had promised to pay for everything, and then maliciously changed my mind. But as the evidence mounted, and the stories didn't add up, the truth had emerged, piece by damning piece. After they left, I felt strangely comforted. At least not everyone involved saw me as the villain in this story. Some people understood that I was the victim of fraud, not the perpetrator of some cruel vacation cancellation. The next morning, I woke to an email from Adrian. He had spoken with my father's lawyer, who had quickly backed down when presented with the evidence of fraud. The threat of legal action against me had been withdrawn. However, Adrian wrote, "Your father is now claiming that he had verbal permission to use the card for family expenses and that this qualifies. It's a weak argument, especially given the amount and the documented deception. But he's trying to find a way to avoid potential criminal charges from your police report." The credit card company's fraud investigation was ongoing, but Adrian seemed confident in the outcome. The evidence was overwhelmingly in my favor, and it was likely that all charges would be reversed. As the days passed, the direct communications from my father and Tanya decreased, replaced by attempts to manipulate me through other family members. Distant relatives I rarely spoke to suddenly called with concerns about the family rift. Old family friends sent messages urging reconciliation and forgiveness. It was a coordinated campaign to pressure me into dropping the fraud claim and paying for the vacation after all. I held firm. This wasn't about the money anymore, though $23,000 was certainly significant. This was about respect, boundaries, and refusing to be manipulated and exploited any longer. 2 weeks after the airport incident, I met Mason for lunch as promised. He looked tired and stressed. "It's chaos at home," he said after we ordered. "Dad and Tanya are fighting constantly. Lacey barely comes out of her room. Everyone's blaming each other for what happened. I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this," I said sincerely. Mason shrugged. "It's not your fault. Dad did something wrong, and there were consequences. That's how the world works." He paused. "I've been thinking a lot about how they've treated you over the years. It wasn't right, and I'm sorry I never said anything. You were just a kid," I reminded him. "Still," he insisted, "I knew it wasn't fair how they always expected you to help financially, but treated you like an outsider otherwise. I should have said something." We spent the rest of lunch talking about Mason's plans for college next year and his interest in engineering. For the first time, we connected as brothers rather than as members of separate family factions. It was a small positive outcome in an otherwise painful situation. As I walked back to my office after lunch, I felt a growing sense of peace about my decision to stand firm. The relationships that were worth salvaging would survive this crisis. The ones that were built on exploitation and manipulation were better left behind. 3 months passed, and life settled into a new normal. I had moved to a different part of town, partly for a shorter commute to work, but mostly for a fresh start. My new apartment was smaller, but felt more like home than anywhere I had lived before. The credit card company had completed their investigation and reversed all charges from the travel agency. My father's lawyer had ultimately dropped all threats of legal action when faced with the overwhelming evidence of fraud. The police investigation had concluded with a decision not to press formal charges, largely due to my statement that I preferred to handle the matter through civil channels. The financial aspect of the situation was resolved, but the emotional landscape of my family relationships had been permanently altered. I hadn't spoken directly to my father or Tanya since the incident. They had made a few attempts at contact in the weeks following the airport debacle, ranging from angry accusations to tearful pleas. But I had maintained my distance, allowing myself the space to process everything that had happened. I had started seeing a therapist, Dr. Rebecca Chen, who specialized in family trauma. Our weekly sessions had become a valuable part of my healing process. Family betrayal cuts, especially deep, Dr. Chen explained during one session. We expect those closest to us to have our best interests at heart. When they violate that trust, particularly in such a calculated way, it challenges our fundamental understanding of those relationships. With her guidance, I had begun to recognize patterns of manipulation and emotional exploitation that had characterized my relationship with my father for years. The vacation fraud wasn't an isolated incident, but rather the culmination of a lifetime of boundary violations. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, Dr. Chen reminded me often. It's an essential part of healthy relationships. What your father did wasn't just financially fraudulent. It was emotionally fraudulent. He violated your trust and then tried to make you feel guilty for protecting yourself. Outside of therapy, I had found support in unexpected places. Mason and I had continued to meet regularly for lunch or coffee, building a relationship independent of our shared family history. He was preparing to start college in the fall and had recently confided that he was considering moving into campus housing rather than commuting from home. Things are still tense at home, he had explained. Dad and Tanya argue constantly about money. I think they're having serious financial problems, but they won't talk about it directly. I had also joined a support group for people dealing with toxic family dynamics. The stories shared in our bi-weekly meetings often echoed aspects of my own experience. And there was comfort in knowing I wasn't alone. More importantly, I was learning strategies for maintaining boundaries without carrying unnecessary guilt. My social circle had expanded in other ways too. Without the emotional drain of constantly managing my father's demands and manipulations, I had more energy for genuine friendships. I reconnected with college friends I had lost touch with and formed closer bonds with colleagues at work. In July, I took a vacation of my own, a week-long trip to the Pacific Northwest with 2 close friends. We hiked through old-growth forests, kayaked in pristine lakes, and stayed in a rustic cabin with no cell service. It was nothing like the luxury villa my father had attempted to charge to my card, but it was exactly what I needed: peaceful, genuine, and shared with people who valued me for who I was, not what I could provide. On returning from the trip, I found a letter waiting in my mailbox. The return address was my father's, but the handwriting wasn't his. Inside was a 3-page handwritten letter from him, the first direct communication in months. The letter began with something I had never heard from him before: an apology. Not a qualified "I'm sorry, but," or a deflecting "I'm sorry you feel," but a straightforward acknowledgement of wrongdoing. "What I did was wrong," he wrote. "Using your card without permission was theft. Plain and simple. Lying to everyone about it made it worse. I have no excuse that would justify my actions, though I spent months trying to convince myself otherwise," he went on to explain, without justifying, the financial pressures that had led to his decision. Tanya had been pushing for a luxury vacation they couldn't afford. His business had been struggling. He had felt humiliated by his inability to provide what she wanted. None of it excused the theft, he acknowledged, but it provided context for his desperate choice. "The hardest part to admit," he continued, "is that this isn't the first time I've taken advantage of your generosity. For years, I've treated you as a financial resource rather than a son. I convinced myself I was entitled to your help because I was your father, but the truth is I failed in my responsibilities to you long before you had any to me." The letter concluded with a request, not for money or forgiveness, but simply for the opportunity to speak in person someday, when and if I was ready. I read the letter several times, trying to gauge its sincerity. Was this another manipulation tactic, or the beginning of genuine remorse? I couldn't be sure, but I appreciated that he had reached out without demands or expectations. I shared the letter with Dr. Chen at our next session. "This could be a positive sign," she said cautiously. "But remember that true change takes time and consistent effort. One letter doesn't erase years of behavior. If you decide to respond, maintain your boundaries. You can acknowledge his apology. Without immediately returning to a close relationship, I took her advice and sent a brief email to my father. I acknowledged receiving his letter and expressed appreciation for his apology. I explained that I wasn't ready for an in-person meeting yet, but was open to limited communication via email as a starting point. It was a small opening, carefully bounded. But it was more than I had been ready to offer 3 months earlier. The journey ahead would be long and uncertain. Rebuilding trust, if it was even possible, would take years of consistent respect for boundaries on his part. But for the first time, I felt hopeful that change might be possible. Not just in him, but in me. I had learned valuable lessons through this painful experience. I had learned that setting boundaries wasn't selfish, but necessary. I had learned that family should be defined by mutual respect and care, not by blood ties or obligation. Most importantly, I had learned that I deserved relationships based on genuine connection, not exploitation. As I looked toward the future, I felt a deep sense of peace. Whatever happened with my father, whether we eventually rebuilt some version of our relationship or remained distant, I knew I would be okay. I had discovered my own worth, independent of his approval or acceptance. I had found the strength to protect myself, even when it was difficult. And I had begun building a life filled with authentic connections rather than obligatory ones. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who took advantage of you financially? Let me know in the comments below. Your story might help someone else who's struggling with similar issues. Remember that protecting yourself isn't selfish. It's necessary for your well-being. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button, subscribe to hear more stories like this, and share with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to stand up for themselves. Thank you for listening. And remember, true family is defined by respect and love, not by who can take the most from you.